Hi everyone, Amy here with my final updates on last week's writing prompt and open discussions. That was week 4. If you're just tuning in to the news for the first time this week, make sure that you read all my updates in my welcome post for week 5. I have a lot of clarification here on what you need to do for the campaign analysis blog essay, and your rough draft is due next week. So make sure that you are making note of the things that I am explaining here as you start to work on your rough drafts in preparation for that deadline, which is a week from tomorrow. I'm going to focus here again mostly on giving feedback on your discussions for last week, so I'll go ahead and jump right into those. I will start with your writing prompt discussion. In general, things are improving. Most of you did a little bit better job this week meeting the deadlines and completing all the requirements of these assignments, so good job with that. In the writing prompt specifically, I was asking you to look at the rhetorical features of these two ads and comparing and contrasting them to one another. And I provided some comments about your posts in my midweek updates for last week, but I'm going to talk a little bit more in depth about a couple of those concepts here again today. So one thing I wanted to clarify is that in fact both of these advertisements are actually persuasive, and so several of you were talking about the ads in terms of their informative nature or the fact that the speakers are explaining things to their audience. And when you're thinking that way, I would ask you just to maybe be a little bit more skeptical. In fact, these advertisements are intending to influence their audiences in some way. And as critical readers and thinkers, it's important to be aware of the ways that texts are trying to manipulate their audiences or influence their audiences, even if it's subtle. So hopefully some of those effects did become clear to you over the course of last week as you were completing the discussion, or if not, they'll become a little bit more clear to you after watching this video. So let me go ahead and jump into our 5 minutes of fame here, because some of the things that you all came up with will actually highlight what I was looking for in terms of discussing the rhetorical features of these ads. So first of all, this person says, this advertisement is aimed at anyone who will watch to persuade people to vote for cleaner energy. Using photos of destroyed ecosystems and dead animals really shows the viewer the true cost of oil drilling and the gas they use in their cars, really causing an emotional response. So there's a couple of things that I want to point out here. This person did a really good job really highlighting that persuasive purpose, that is the rhetorical goal that both of these ads are working toward, as I've said before. So I liked the really precise language here. And then there are also hints of logos and pathos being discussed as, you know, this is really getting the message across. Usually we think of that as logos, and then causing an emotional response obviously is going to be pathos. This person really did a good job touching on the ethos effect. This gives viewers a sense of enjoyment because BP seems to be very concerned for the Gulf and helped clean up the oil, which makes BP look trustworthy and committed. So this is definitely an ethos point. I know a lot of you talked about the idea that Ryan Reynolds was used as a celebrity endorsement for the NRDC ad, but very few of you touched on the rhetorical choice to use Fred Lamond as the speaker in the BP ad. So they're definitely choosing Lamond as the speaker in order to make BP look trustworthy and committed, and I would have liked to see more discussion of that throughout the week, but I did like that this person was able to touch on that ethical persona that BP was trying to cultivate in their ad. And then this comment here I thought did a good job of touching on the pathological effects of the ads together. Although both oil campaigns were very persuasive and direct towards making viewers feel a certain way, the feeling received from these campaigns affect the audience completely differently, and each campaign is directed to its own kind of audience. It just depends what values the voters cherish and possess. So again, identifying that persuasive purpose, but I really like this comment because it is true that when we're talking about pathos, we're talking directly about the reader's values and how well does the speaker or the writer of that text tap into those values and build common ground with their audience as opposed to alienating them or clashing against their values. So this is a very important strategy when you're trying to make an argument, because you kind of want to win the audience over to your side, and if you can show that that you share some of their values, you're much more likely to be able to do that. And then finally, this last comment I just wanted to pull out because it did a really great job synthesizing all of the rhetorical strategies and then also using the vocabulary or the language of the text for this unit and the course content that I want you guys to become familiar with. So these are terms that I do want to see in your essays and your campaign analysis blogs. So the more you can familiarize yourself with them through these discussions, the better. So this person says, the images are chosen to depict the devastation caused by accidents involved in oil production, with an appeal to both the pathos and the logos, in that the viewer is expected to be roused by the devastating imagery and sense of shared responsibility, but also there's an implied cause and effect in that continuing with the harvesting of fossil fuels like oil will cause continued devastation to the environment. The selection of celebrity Ryan Reynolds as the narrator is intended to appeal to the ethos in that a celebrity is willing to attach their name to the validity of the cause, and also his call on the viewer to get involved. So this just does a great job, again, using words like pathos and logos and using them correctly. So for example, here this writer says, with an appeal to pathos, and then goes on to provide an example of that in that the viewer is expected to be roused by the devastating imagery and sense of shared responsibility. That is definitely pathos, because anytime we're talking about rousing the audience or tapping into their emotions to really make them passionate or motivate them, that's going to be a pathos point. And then demonstrating knowledge of logos, the writer also gives an example of the implied cause and effect in that continuing with the harvesting of fossil fuels will cause continued devastation. And that is a logical point. That is kind of what we refer to in rhetoric as a causal chain. So saying that one thing will lead to the next, will lead to the next, will lead to the next is a logical way to structure your ideas in certain cases. And so using the term logos to describe this effect is very appropriate. And then obviously the correct use of the term ethos here in discussing the credibility and trustworthiness of the writer, or in this case, actually the speaker. And the other thing I like about this example too is that it's discussing pathos and logos together and then ethos kind of separately, and that's a really great intuitive way to approach the assignment, I think, because typically what you will see in text is that the logos and pathos are often in tension with each other. So the more pathos you have, the less logos you have, the more logos you have, the less pathos you have, kind of in a zero-sum game there. So if you add some pathos or emotion, you risk taking away some of the logic or reasonableness of the argument. So those two are very closely tied to one another and connected, whereas ethos is kind of more behind the scenes. How does this writer come across to you, as opposed to the overt, explicit things that are stated in the text or shown in the video in this case. So I just thought that was a really intuitive, again, way to approach the discussion, and it shows that this person really understands all the different types of rhetorical effects, very in depth. So great job, everyone, as you were discussing those rhetorical effects here. One thing I also want to comment on for our writing prompt discussion from last week is that almost all of you did not complete the reflection at the end of the week. And so remember from your rubric that you actually cannot get higher than a 13 if you're missing the final reflection. So even down to a 14 and 15 has some attempt at a final reflection, even if it is inadequate. So this might be the kind of thing where you're replying to one of the comments you received, but you don't really have an overall synthesis of everything in a final wrap-up comment at the end of your thread. But again, most of you were missing it all together, and so you're really doing yourself a disservice in your grades, in the sense that a D is not a passing grade, and if you're not doing the reflection, you're automatically getting a D. So make sure you watch out for that if you've been wondering why you haven't been getting such high grades on your discussions. The other thing I want to point out is that you can still post a reflection even if you didn't receive any comments from your peers. Nikki's post from last week is a really good example of that. So she says, while I didn't receive any replies, I overall learned a lot of things while I was reflecting on comparing visuals. I realized how many ways there are to analyze something. So short is a 30-second ad. You can look at tone, visuals, nonverbal, close, character, etc. And this is all really great because I can tell this came from the reading for last week. Looking at the audience, rhetorical strategies, the writer, and having the two opposites to compare. So this totally synthesizes everything Nikki has learned throughout the week. And even though she didn't have any comments to reply to, she's still able to do exactly what the reflection is asking you to do and get full points for it. So way to go, Katie, or excuse me, Nikki. Let me show a couple of threads that I also thought were successful in general that did receive comments. One was Katie's. So Katie had some comments and then did a really great job summing everything up in her final reflection at the end. So it does address the comments that she's received, but that's not the entire point. The point is really to show what she's learned that may be different from when she posted originally at the beginning of the week. So basically the two ads are using their own techniques. Both use visual imagery to appeal to emotions in two different ways. Striving to or excuse me, both ads using different techniques to get their message out, and as a result, both were successful. I don't think that's an invalid evaluation there, because they really do have somewhat different audiences, and in as much as they're using different kinds of strategies, it's very possible that they could both be successful. And then another thread that I saw that I thought there was a really good conversation going on was Jessica M's. Jessica got some comments from her peers, quite a few actually, and then was able to kind of synthesize everything and extend what she had learned in this final comment. So these are the kinds of things you want to be emulating when you're doing your final reflections at the end of the week if you're trying to get full weekly points for the writing prompts. Let's move on to talk about your open discussion from last week quickly. Just to clarify, I know there were a lot of questions about what to put on your blog. I know a lot of you chose to put just copy and paste what you had written for your writing prompt onto your blog, and that's fine, but you were not required to do so. So Chris and a couple of the other people, rest assured it's fine if you posted about baseball, it's fine if you posted about whatever, because the point of this was really just to get you to set up your blog, and I don't care what you wrote about as long as you were able to execute the header, the title, the background, the labels, and those embedded links. When you get to writing your actual campaign analysis blog essay, you'll need to choose just one ad from the campaign that you're going to be focusing on. You need to introduce it in an introduction, provide just a very brief summary of it, and then you can go from there right into a discussion of each of the different rhetorical effects like logos, pathos, and ethos, and those will culminate on an overall claim in a conclusion paragraph that evaluates the advertisement as a whole and was it successful in achieving its persuasive purpose. So let me take a look at an example that was pretty close to being a rough draft, but not quite there yet. So Nikki went ahead and posted on her blog a kind of rough draft of her essay, and actually this blog looks really good. It's got the title in the background. It doesn't really have a separate header, so that's maybe one thing I would add. These links need to be embedded. You don't want to see any URLs, no HTTP, no slashes, none of that. This URL should be totally hidden within the text and embedded there. But one thing I wanted to point out is that Nikki does have the labels, so most of you were not able to execute this, but these are really successful here because these are words that someone might actually search if they were looking for this topic. And then the only thing that I would say is that Nikki needs to restructure this according to what I just described in terms of just using the intro to introduce and summarize the ad. Pick one ad to analyze, because right now, Nikki, you have a paragraph about one ad basically, and then a paragraph about another ad. So as you introduce the ad here, just pick one, then have a paragraph about the logical appeals, a paragraph about the pathos in the ad, a paragraph about the ethos in the ad, and then based on those strengths and weaknesses, did you think it was overall successful? Evaluate that in your conclusion and sum up those logos, pathos, and ethos points there for proper organization. So that's just a tip for those of you who are going to get started working on your rough drafts over the weekend. So make sure that you are keeping that in mind. As far as the structure of the open discussion itself, your comments to one another are getting better. I'm seeing a lot more thought put into the overall replies that you're posting on one another's original threads. So that really works because, again, for open discussions, the goal is not so much the originals, but just to have a really good conversation through your replies. So again, Nikki's here is a good example. I know that in Jessica Peck's original thread, there were a lot of good examples of comments. So if you're wondering how to make your comments really substantial, look at these examples. And then again, just make sure you're executing the header, title, background labels, and links. Embed those links. Don't forget your labels. Your header should be somewhat different from the background itself. Okay, so if you have questions about how to execute any of that, please do let me know because it'll be very important when we get to turning in your final drafts of the essay. That's it for now. Let me know if you have any questions about last week's assignment.